Ladies and gentlemen, dame I gospodo, welcome to the University of Rijeka, the Faculty of Law, for this great event we organized together with our partners, the Association for Sport in the EU and Football Legal. This event is broadcasted and streamed also online for all those that haven't had the possibility to come to Rijeka. And it's a nice event that we wanted to show worldwide. The event is organized by the Sports Law, Sports Policy and Sports Diplomacy Center and the Jean Monnet Chair of EU Sports Law Policy and Diplomacy. It's one of the events we are organizing in the recent few months, mostly connected to the European model of sport, but not just the European model of sport. Topics about the modern challenges of football will be tackled today. Firstly, we will slightly moderate the program, and we will start with the panel discussion. And in the second part, we will have the Q&A part with Mr. Zvonimir Boban, who is here with us, and he would like to answer all your questions. And since we have a simultaneous translation, you are free to pose the questions, of course, in Croatian. And I must say, his will was to have as more as possible questions, and he is very keen to speak in Croatian and answer the questions in Croatian, because Croatia is his country, and it's something very unusual to speak in a foreign language between. For me, it's not, yeah. But I'm doing that because of our friends who are online. So, hvala svima još jednom na dolasku. I will now call our Vice Rector, Professor Marta Žuvić, to approach the audience.
Hello, nice to see you here. On behalf of University of Rijeka and Madam Rector, Mrs. Snježana Prijić-Samaržija, I am passing on her congratulations to the organizers and also wishes for the fruitful event here, which is organized by our Center for European Sports, Policy and Diplomacy. So first of all, let me congratulate Professor Vanja Smokvina for this activity, but also very, very many other activities that are organized by this center. And I must say it's one of most prominent centers at our university, which promotes these special activities in sports. Our university is celebrating 50th anniversary this year, but also 390 years of tradition of higher education in Croatia, in Rijeka. And we are really proud of our academic and community engagement activities, for which we have been listed on all ranking systems at the world level, but also winning some awards for these activities that we promote. And but I have to say that sport and sports activities were somehow neglected in the last period of our university. But I need to point out that just last year we approached and adopted at our Senate some strategic documents on sports development of sport activities and sports infrastructure. So just this year I can announce that a big project of establishing and building up some sports infrastructure on our campus area is to be finished this year, and it will also comprise to and attribute to more of the taking care for sports activities and for activities not just of our students but also of our academics. So in this light, I'm also congratulating again for this event, because also all these activities around sport, like law in sports and problems in sports diplomacy, are also important. So I wish this event to be fruitful, to enjoy it, and I'm sure that the discussion here will be of most use for all the participants. So thank you very much, and this will be the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Žujić. Now, before starting the roundtable discussion, I would just like to thank all of you that are here in person at the University of Law Faculty of Rijeka, who are online. I must say that here we have the representatives of the Croatian Football Federation in the name of Mr. Darko Rajić-Sudar, and of course we have the representatives of the local club, Football Club Rijeka, also our friends and members of the center here of Sports, Law, Policy and Diplomacy in Rijeka. And by saying that, I would now call the moderator of the roundtable. It's a great honor, I must say, and it's a prestige to have here with us Mr. Julien Zilberstein, who is also one of the members of our center, which made us really, really proud. But not just that, he is, as you can see in the program, Managing Director of the European Affairs and Governance at UEFA. I must say it may be the toughest position in UEFA, together with Zvone, because recently, especially with all legal aspects that you are facing with the Court of Justice cases going on, it's really, for a law faculty, a pleasure to have you here with us, Julien. So, Julien, please, the floor is yours.
So, good afternoon, Croatia. Good afternoon, Rijeka. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. I would like to start by thanking the Faculty of Law of the university here, but also the Center for Sports Law, Sports Policy, Sports Diplomacy, the Sport and EU Association, and the Football Legal Journal. I'm not only happy to be here today, but I'm also honored. I'm honored to be moderating this discussion with the ones I like to call the 4 Ps. Why the 4 Ps? Because we have the player, the legend, Zvonimir Boban, because we have the politician, Simona Kustec, we have the professor, Richard Parrish, who also sponsored the weather today. Thank you, Richard. And we have, last but not least, the phenom with Professor Vanja Smogvina. So, a pleasure, an honor, and a privilege, because I couldn't think of a better lineup to look into what is definitely a very relevant topic. Why a relevant topic? Because it's fair to say that in the past 3 years, we have faced probably more challenges than in the past 3 decades. Think about COVID-19, the Super League, the war, legal challenges, power games, economic pressure. And you know, when you look back, you see that football usually has been, and sport in general, have been quite good in navigating through crisis, no matter what crisis. Think about the end of the Soviet Union, think about the breakup of Yugoslavia, think about the transformation of Eastern Europe. But now, the challenges we see come from, more often than not, more from within the game, with stakeholders and economic operator being driven by a thirst of more power, more money, and always more money. And so it is indispensable that in circumstances like this one, European football remains united. If we want to enhance the game, if we want to protect the game as we like it and as we love it, if we want to make the game more sustainable, if we want to make football more attractive, and if we want football to remain true to its social values, unity is fundamental. And we saw a strong show of force, a strong demonstration of that unity in April 2021 after the shameful announcement of the Super League, where everybody came together. Football associations, professional leagues, clubs, players, coaches, national governments, European policymakers. Everybody was united to show the Super League the red card and to lend strong support to the European sports model and the European football pyramid. And this leads me to my first question, which I will ask Simona, because ladies are first, but not only. You, not so long ago, you were Minister for Sport in your country of origin, Slovenia, and during your tenure, Slovenia held the presidency of the European Union. And during the presidency of the European Union, you in particular pushed and convinced your peer from 26 other national governments to have the Council of the European Union to adopt a landmark resolution on the European sports model. And it was the first time in 20 years that we had such a document on the table. So my question to you is, if you think that the global success of European football is due, at least to some extent, to the fact that football in Europe has remained loyal to the European sports model.
Thank you very much. First of all, it's really nice being here, as always, in Rijeka, and congratulations to Vanja for this really big event again. He's definitely one of the very solid cornerstoners of sport and sport law and policy, not only here in your country, but also in the region and in Europe in general. And yes, it is always a pleasure and honor at the same time to be here and maybe to exchange some of the thoughts during our presidency time in relation to European model of sport. But at the same time, personally as well, after my political career, I moved back to the university where I'm also dealing with sport policy in more like academic and research terms. And in a way, speaking about the question of European model of sport, this is something that is not new, and it was actually not new also in times of our presidency on these political grounds, but is something that is kind of how to say, like a red line of sports movements and democratic understanding of sport and the role of sport in general. And definitely the main values that are being represented in sport are the main values of contemporary societies that needs to be, if it wants to develop further on, needs to be open, needs to be fair, needs to be solidar. And these all are the values that are being addressed in the main idea of sport. And what we wanted to do with this resolution, which is a completely political document without any legal power actually in itself, we wanted to praise symbolic power to sport and to send a very huge and big commitment and pledge to the sport organizations that we are here always to speak in favor of that kind of sport. If the sport organizations are going to follow and also through their governance and through their rules of the sport games are going to address and also implement these kind of values, then we are here to serve sport and sport organizations if and when they would need also the political voice to stand by their side. So what I want to especially emphasize is, first of all, the fact that we did not want to directly intervene into any kind of sport rules, autonomy, organization, governance, and so on. But in case where the problems appear and where these problems are so intense and so challenging that they are not anymore only in the hands of the sport organization's own autonomy to tackle, to address them, and when they need also, for example, the European Court of Justice to help them solve the problems, then we said in that kind of circumstances we are here or under the conditions where we can identify this kind of sincere values and, of course, the democratic governance that you are going to follow through your own internal sport autonomy. And speaking about football, yes, football is the first sport. It is. And it actually addresses all those values. And it gives actually everybody who wants to, it gives the opportunity to play this game. And what we want here is to help the sport organizations and also this, on this grassroots level in the beginning to be able to address those young boys and girls who has a talent, who have will to play, that they can do it, regardless of how rich their families are, regardless how big or small and so on they are, regardless of the color of their skin and so on. So this is our, let me call it a kind of the public value and interest that the politicians in democracies need to speak in favor of. And in all these circumstances, we are here, we said, and we are going to support all that kind of activities. And therefore, definitely, besides the International Olympic Committee, together with the National Olympic Committees, of course, we see definitely FIFA and UEFA as one of the leading sport organizations that needs to serve here as role models. So the third important message in what we did then was, please do, in a way, let us leave all those words on the paper also, and especially in real life. Let us become role models in practice, in real lives, for everything that we are addressing for better, for more open, and for more cooperative society of the future. So this was kind of the background. Yeah.
Thank you, Simona. You insisted on one important dimension of the resolution, of your resolution of the 30th of November 2021 on the key features of the European sports model, which is that it's not legally binding. It sent a strong political message to a wide range of stakeholders, but it's not legally binding. But Richard, can you perhaps enlighten us from a legal perspective, how was the European sports model, how was the European football pyramid being treated by the European Court of Justice, by the decisional practice of the European Commission? And let me ask you, has the European sports model, or is the European sports model enjoying constitutional status under EU law?
Hello, everybody. First of all, Julien said that I sponsored the weather. I think that's a stereotype, just because I flew from Manchester. And Vanya tells me that it rains more in Rijeka than it does in London. Now, I've been to Rijeka quite a few times, and I've never believed that. And today is the first time that I think it probably has a degree of truth in it. Well, on the question of the European model, I mean, the European model of sport has become quite a contentious issue. And it's not universally accepted by everybody that such a thing exists. And in particular, there are a number of athlete unions, for instance, who think that the European model of sport doesn't give them sufficient access to decision-making. Now, one of the issues that has come to prominence in European Union law is an amendment to the European Treaty in 2009. It entered into force in 2009, which is the Lisbon Treaty, which for the first time makes reference in the EU Treaty to sport. Now, prior to that, the European Union had no competence in the area of sport, but fundamental aspects of the treaty, notably those relating to free movement of workers and competition law, were applied to sport, particularly when sport was practiced as an economic activity. And this gave rise to a concern that European law was not recognizing the specific nature of sport, that sport is different. Sport doesn't operate under the same market conditions as the aviation sector or the automobile sector or the pharmaceutical sector. It's different. And its difference is what we call the specificity of sport. And the International Olympic Committee, supported by the football authorities, campaigned for there to be reference in the treaty to the specific nature of sport. And in the Lisbon Treaty, it was, for the first time, sport was mentioned. And indeed, there is reference to the specific nature of sport. So that kind of gives rise to the idea that there's now some kind of constitutional protection for the specific nature of sport. But I think it also, I think it misses really the point that it is assumed that the European Court of Justice, in its judgments, and we can look at a number of the big judgments, you probably have heard of the Bosman judgment, for instance, it assumes that prior to the Lisbon Treaty, the European Union, the Court of Justice, was insensitive. It just treated sport like any other business. And I don't agree with that. I think the Court of Justice has routinely accepted that sport is different. Even from the founding, the first judgment of the court in the 1970s, in the Walrave case, even in Bosman in 1995, this case concerned a challenge to the operation of the international transfer system and the use of nationality quotas. And you will know, of course, that there was for the sports movement, there was a negative decision in the sense that players, once they reached the end of their contract, were free agents. And the use of the nationality quota was ruled to be discriminatory. And that received a lot of criticism. But the court did, in fact, recognize the specificity of sport in that judgment. It recognized that sports governing bodies retain the power, the right to adopt rules that promote certain legitimate sporting objectives, such as to promote competitive balance and to incentivize the education and training of young players. So the Lisbon Treaty came along in 2009. For me, it wasn't so much a watershed. It was a consolidation of previous practice and previous jurisprudence. There were other examples. In the Laytonen judgment, for instance, this was a case concerning basketball and the use of transfer windows in basketball. The Court of Justice recognized that late season transfers can distort the competition and call into question the proper functioning of the competition. In the Deliège judgment, the Court of Justice recognized the right of federations to adopt selection criteria. In the Mecca Medina judgment, this was a case concerning doping in swimming, elite level swimming. The Court of Justice recognized that sports governing bodies can adopt rules that preserve the integrity and ethics of sport. So it's not the case that the Court of Justice and the European Union generally disregarded the specificity of sport. Now, when the treaty then came into force in 2009, and there's this reference to the specific nature of sport, has that changed anything? I think that's a fundamental question. We have a kind of a jurisprudential basis for recognizing the specificity of sport. Is there now a constitutional dimension in terms of protecting the specificity of sport? Well, I think the practice is still evolving. In the Bernard judgment, this was a case concerning training compensation. It was just about at the same time as the Lisbon Treaty entered into force. The Court of Justice, there was a challenge to the use of training compensation in football and whether or not the use of training compensation amounted to a restriction on a worker's freedom of movement. And the court said, well, there is evidence of a restriction, the requirement to pay training compensation, but training compensation pursues a legitimate objective. That is, it incentivizes the development of young players. And as long as it is proportionate, it doesn't go beyond what is necessary to achieve those objectives, it's fine. And the court then said, and that argument is, and it used this specific word, is corroborated by the existence of Article 165, which is the provision in the treaty relating to sport. Now, for me, maybe it's because I'm a university professor and I get obsessed with words. Corroborated means it supports. It doesn't mandate, it doesn't require the court to take into account the specific nature of sport. Now, more recently, in the Topfik judgment of the Court of Justice, this was a case concerning a German athlete, an amateur athlete, who was, an Italian amateur athlete living in Germany and was excluded from participation in the German Amateur Athletics Championships. And the argument here was that this amounted to nationality discrimination. The court there seemed much more willing to read the reference to the specific nature of sport in Article 165 into the other fundamental aspects of the treaty. Now, this gave rise to this idea that actually the sporting provisions in the treaty are just as important as those economic provisions relating to competition law, relating to free movement. And that judgment, I think, was the first one that really began to reveal the potential strength of Article 165. Now, we've got a number of cases pending, and that's probably been keeping you very busy, Julien. And there are these pending cases before the Court of Justice, and one is in the International Skating Union case, one is in the European Super League case, and the third one is in the Royal Antwerp case, which concerns the use of homegrown players. UEFA has a rule on homegrown players, and this is being challenged. And the Advocate General in these cases, this is a legal opinion before the full judgment, have made some very interesting comments about whether or not the specificity of sport, and if we can equate that to the European model of sport, because if you build the European model of sport around these key principles, these are what we know as the specificities of sport. This will tell us a lot about where we're going, I think, in terms of that question about the constitutional status. In the ISU case, the Advocate General said, and I jotted this down because this is the quote: "The specific characteristics of sport may be relevant." So when the court is looking at if there's a restriction of competition or a restriction of free movement, Article 165 may be relevant in determining whether or not that can be permitted. So again, the use of the word corroborated and may be permitted seems quite weak. So it doesn't indicate that there will be constitutional protection, that the court has to take into account the specific nature of sport. But then along came the judgment, well, not the judgment, the opinion of the Advocate General in the Super League case. And of course, I won't tell you about the Super League case. You've probably all heard of the Super League case. But a very interesting point was made by the Advocate General, where he said that Article, and this is to quote, Article 165 gives expression, moreover, to the constitutional recognition of the European sports model. Now, when I read that, I was very surprised. And this is, if that is approved by the Court of Justice, this is phenomenally good news for the sports movement, because it gives recognition, it gives constitutional recognition to this edifice called the European model of sport. Previously, the court has said certain aspects, certain features of the European model of sport are protected. But now the Advocate General is saying the whole thing is protected by European law. Now, I personally think the Advocate General went a little too far, but I think the point being is that, well, why is there provision in the treaty on the specific nature of sport? It has to mean something, otherwise why is it there? The question is, does it require the court to take into account the specific nature of sport in the application of other treaty principles? Or is it there to guide the court? Is it persuasive and it helps them form a judgment? And then, just to finish, then we had the Advocate General's opinion in the Royal Antwerp case. This is the case concerning homegrown players. And I would say here that the Advocate General poured quite a large bucket of cold water on the previous Advocate General by denying the existence of what we call a horizontal obligation, this horizontal reach of 165 into other fundamental provisions. And the Advocate General was basically saying Article 165 is merely soft law, it's not binding, it's only applied to the member states, and therefore bodies like UEFA can't rely upon it. I'm not sure about that, because the treaty itself does address, the Article 165 is addressed to the member states, but it also makes reference to the bodies responsible for sport. And they are the governing bodies of sport. So I'm not entirely with the Advocate General on that point. And the idea, I think, and I'll finish here, the point is, does the existence of Article 165, does it change anything? And I'm coming at it from a very academic, legal perspective. And my argument is, well, does it force the court to take into account the specific nature of sport, or is it merely persuasive? And ultimately, does it matter? Because the court has always recognised the specific nature of sport. So I think it is important. I can't agree with the Advocate General in the Royal Antwerp case, claiming that this is merely soft law, it has very little meaning, because why would the member states adopt a new provision for the court to interpret it in a way that makes it redundant? That makes no sense. And it doesn't make any sense if you look at the history of the jurisprudence of the court. The court very rarely retracts or rows back on a competence. The court expands a competence. It's very often called judicial activism. And sometimes the Court of Justice is criticised for being overly judicially active. So I can't see how the court is going to side totally with the opinion of the Advocate General in Royal Antwerp. And again, just to reiterate, does it matter? I don't necessarily think it does, because I can't see the court departing from its previous jurisprudence in which it has recognised that sport is different. I'm sorry that was a rather long academic answer.
Very thorough, as always, with you, Richard. Thank you very much. We will get back to Article 165, its legal consequences, and also the ins and outs of the legal discussion regarding the Super League case. But to set the scene, I would like to ask Zvone to tell us how was his first day at UEFA. It was a day to remember, wasn't it?
Thanks, Julian. Hello, everyone. Yes, we can communicate and interact in English, obviously, but since we are in Croatian, our homeland, and I would be speaking in my mother tongue language, maybe it would be a little bit more natural to speak in Italian, which is the second one, but Yes, I'll be speaking in a beautiful Croatian language. So please take your headphones. Yes. Hvala Vanja na pozivu. Dobar dan još jedan put svima.
Thank you, Vanya. Thank you for inviting me. Hello once again. For the first day of my cooperation with UEFA. The first day when I started to cooperate with UEFA was quite dramatic as far as I remember, so allow me just to present that. After that academic and legal part I presented by Richard and so many articles I'm so confused with, but he was brilliant and has clarified many things to us, because you need a sort of legal culture, because you don't need it, you can't apply it neither in football or nowhere else. So my first day in football, it was quite dramatic. It was mad, because Mr. Friedman invited me. Before we said that I should start working by June 1st, but the 24th, the month before, said, well, come on, join me at a conference. I would like to introduce you to some people. You're going to be the football boss. That was a bit different than what we have agreed upon before. And I said, okay, good. Let's see each other in Ljubljana the next day. So I continued, I went to his home, and I instantly saw that he was quite nervous. Why not? Because they didn't they didn't get to an agreement with certain clubs the day before. As I'm quite a long time already in football, I knew that there were some ideas going around regarding the Super League. And I understood that the problem is huge, and I got it that his friend will be drinking that day. That is what I told him instantly. And he said, no, we should talk about that. I know what it's about. And we drove up to Switzerland for 8 hours, where we tried to talk with Daniele, who was the boss of the Italian clubs, and the UEFA was about to sign the Champions League's revision in the year 24, which has been already defined completely. And at once, the gentleman just shut his telephone, just closed, and he said, okay, let's define a draft for the media. After that, he just disappeared. We developed that draft, and he said he shall read it and try to upgrade it sometimes. Well, anyway, we sent the draft, and the telephone was off, and the next day at midnight it was announced to keep it in marketing-wise quite exciting, and that was the announcement of the Super League. Well, from the football way and life, I'm living football, and I'm still watching many games a day. And after such a dramatic beginning, I'm still watching Croatian League, which I'm very fond of. And well, I'm also friends with people from the football, and I know that justice is hidden somewhere in the law. But if this had happened, the Super League would have never come true, and at the end they would have been forced to get into the clubs and to implement that. Because when some countries would understand, who did not understand it so far, because in France they understood instantly what this is about, and they are stealing our identification, they're stealing our memory, our history sometimes, and they have reacted phenomenally. In other countries, they didn't understood it that way. Well, there is a Super League who is managing that. FIFA, oh, okay, well, many people don't care what FIFA does. People want to watch their club to be judged fairly and handled fairly. But this Superliga thing should have been dealt with, yes, fairly. Not to talk about Ceferina brilliantly, but I have to say that he did a brilliant job. He said no where he had to say no. He was the right player on the right spot. And it is very clear where this is heading to. And he also has created football nations, and people love him. I have to say that English culture of life and what does football mean to them, more than to others, I have to say. In a cultural way, I don't want to say that football means more to them than to us. Not that, because also we are living football. Thank you, English, for that, to invent it. But their reaction, keep in mind their reaction, how they think about it, how do they live football. It's part of their lives. So that was my first life.
I would like to ask you another question. We see that the promoters of the Super League are very good at saying everything one day and the opposite the following day. Now they claim that they can operate a competition that will serve the same objectives as within the current model, but they can do better. What does inspire you?
Oni su na jako diletantski, na jako amaterski, na jako žalostan I egoističan način opće lansirali tu ligu.
They were definitely amateurs in that regard. So when they launched that Liga with so many changes, and they're now doing the following. They are just negating the entire idea. Allow me just to repeat what the representative of Real said. Why shouldn't we play with Liverpool every year? And now, at once, every year, they did it. Now they have 60 to 80 clubs at the moment, which is ridiculous. And they're talking about solidarity funds, which have never been part of an idea. This is a super capitalistic way to understand football. I personally would respect them far more if they had stuck to their idea, to the initial idea. But people, well, they're consistent, I would say, in what they're doing. I have to say people, because these are not clubs. These are people. People with huge problems, referring to their ego. And everything that happened and what happened after that, when the entire football nation, so many other people, millions of people, whoever helped you say no, and you still continue doing what you intend to do. I'm disconcerted. Those two people, our clubs are huge, and I hope they still will play brilliant football. I think they're quite confused, and whatever happens, well, we'll see. I'll be glad that DJ also decides what the only logical thing would be to decide. Whoever doesn't have the right to do so, no one has the right to prevent them from playing, so they're forbidden, but we have the right to play our Liga, which will happen in the case if the response of the ECJ will be negative, which I personally do not believe, but nevertheless.
One of the claims made by the Super League is actually that UEFA would be in a sort of conflict of interest because they are both the regulator of the competitions and they organize competitions. But Richard, can you tell us if it is illegal under EU law to have this dual function of being both the regulator and the competition organizer? Is it legal or not?
There's no requirement in EU law for a sports governing body to separate its commercial and regulatory functions.
Thank you.
The issue about conflicts of interest arises because, of course, the European model of sport vests a lot of power in a sports governing body. The way that it's organised on a territorial basis. So we have take football. Football, for instance, is a classic example of the so-called European model of sport. At the pinnacle, you have FIFA, the global regulator. Affiliated to FIFA are the continental regulators, such as UEFA. And then affiliated to members of UEFA, actually they're technically members of FIFA, but are the national associations. And so you have this clear, and that operates in a number of sports. You have this clear structure, one federation per sport per country, and that basically gives the federation monopoly power. And in particular, when the federation first entered the scene, so to speak, many of them well over 100 years ago, they performed relatively straightforward functions. They acted in a regulatory capacity. They put on events, they organised things, they ensured consistency of rules and things like this. The modern sports governing body, of course, operates to a much higher level of complexity in terms of its functions. It operates in a commercial manner as well, and it has to address a whole number of other issues, such as integrity and governance issues as well. So the role of a sports governing body is far more complex now than it used to be. And this gives rise, particularly the ability to have a regulatory function and a commercial function, gives rise to what the Advocate General in the Moto judgment referred to as the potential for a conflict of interest. And that, I think, is the issue that the Super League and other complainants have focused on. Now, as I've said, there isn't a requirement in EU law to separate the regulatory and commercial functions. That was once a solution that was offered in the Formula One case, which concerned the FIA as the governing body and the organisation of Formula One, but that was just for Formula One events. And so, it might be considered appropriate. For instance, thinking of the UK, the British Horse Racing Association, authority, I should say, separated its function from the Jockey Club. And so it's a possibility, but European law doesn't require it. And the evidence for that proposition comes from the Moto judgment, which is a judgment of the Court of Justice. It concerned motorcycling in Greece, where the court said that what has to be in evidence is the ability to review a decision. So, for instance, if a sports governing body, at the one hand, is able to issue licenses, for instance, authorising a third-party event, as was the case in the Super League, as is the case in the International Skating Union case, is that governing body using that power to block market access for third parties to put on their own events? Because they don't want to compete, they don't want those events to compete with their own events. That's the conflict of interest. So how do you mitigate that conflict of interest? One option is you separate those functions, but that's not required. The court said that's not required. What is required is that in exercising that discretion, that should be subject to review. And most governing bodies these days give jurisdiction to resolve disputes to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, for instance. So there are governance solutions to how you mitigate conflicts of interest. And it's not entirely clear to me why conflicts of interest wouldn't be replicated by the Super League company. What's different? Because effectively, the Super League company simply want to create the same system that they're accusing UEFA of having. Now, so that, I think that is an inconsistency in their argument. I want to put one last point out there. We're having this debate about conflicts of interest, governance in the United Kingdom at the moment. There was a fan-led review that resulted in the recommendation for there to be an independent regulator of English football. And the government are putting forward before Parliament a white paper. This, I can imagine, is not a great, sports governing bodies are not great advocates of this. And I'm surprised that there hasn't been more discussion within the European Union about whether or not the governance solution to mitigate conflicts of interest has been given too much time And it's now time for there to be an independent regulator of football in the same way that is now being proposed in England. Now, the legal argument here is that I can't really see that happening. I don't think there's the political will for that. I don't think there's a legal basis for that. And I have my doubts as to whether or not it would in any effect be effective. So I think at the moment, how do we mitigate conflicts of interest in international sports governance? That is through the governing bodies adhering to principles of good governance to make sure that conflicts are mitigated by involving those people who are affected by their decisions within the process. So that's stakeholder representation of clubs and athletes, for instance, and also making sure that their decisions are subject to review and appeal in an independent and non-biased manner.
Thank you. Zvone, you wanted to add something? You wanted to say something, sorry.
Richard said everything, actually. Ne, htio sam samo reći da je ljudima potrebno objasniti UEFA i FIFA su no-profit organizacije. Kao što je Richard spomenuo sad, pitanje je na kraju good governance. Ja ne vjerujem neovisnost.
I just wanted to say that FIFA and UEFA are non-profit organizations. It is a matter of good governance. I don't believe in the independence of bodies, because bodies always want somebody to control, because these independent bodies will somehow become dependent on something, on somebody. So it would be good to have an independent regulating body, like the Italian football should have that. So it is definitely difficult to make a framework, a legal framework for football. And it is also difficult for you to accept to everybody who like football how far this referee legal framework is applying football. And this can also be applied to legal instances, different legal instances. I think you should know the as far as good governance in football is concerned, 70% of the FIFA money from all the competitions, most from the Champions League, everything was being reinvested in football. It doesn't mean that everybody gets the same, because not everybody contributes in the same level and way, and not everybody invests the same. And there are also broadcasting rights which bring money to football, but everybody gets the same. I'm sorry, 97%. Only 3% is left for our salaries and organization. That is good governance, and nobody's talking about that. When I'm thinking about Superliga, like Richard said, I would like to have my own private UEFA, and regulatory matters, it would be the same, but how would the money then be divided? I would like to know that. So in the same way, UEFA and FIFA are not private organizations. So, and when you don't take this into account, then you can't also take governments of the states into account. I mean, but this
speaking
is
of governance, Vanya, some of the clubs still involved in the Super League, Barcelona, Juve, not to name them, have had some internal governance issues. Does that suggest that the need for strong governing bodies is even more acute today?
Yes. After everything what Richard, Simona, and Zvone said, it's very hard to add anything. I think it was rightly pointed out. The thing that I would like just to connect to where Zvone ended, yeah, if we see a small group of 10, 40, 20 clubs building up a competition for themselves, now claiming that they want to involve also some other clubs and they're speaking about 40, 60, 80 clubs. In the end, what they are trying to have more support from the other clubs for, let's say, other important clubs, but not involved in the very first stage of that project. And it's difficult to say that such an organization, such a company, it's really a company. And we know, as one said before, UEFA and FIFA are associations that are not created for profit. They are created for the development of the sport, like sports federation and sport governing bodies in all sports, FIBA for basketball, FIFA, UEFA at European level for football, and so on. That's their role. They are not created for profit. And if we know that 97% of the revenue UEFA is earning from TV rights, merchandising, broadcasting, which is getting higher and higher every year, is distributed to the clubs, and then also that money goes to the grassroots associations and clubs, which are in the end developing the sport. They are working with girls and boys. They are educating them in a sport way, but also they are working with them. They're educating them to be a better person, because we know how sport is important for the well-being, for the health, but also for a better development of a human being. Here, what is also important to say, yes, this is a conference mostly on football, and we are speaking mostly on football. And Simona said football is most important. Yeah, maybe it's not the most important because we like football and it's a passion and so on. But on the other hand, what we must be proud in Europe, and probably you more at UEFA, that the Champions League and the European competitions are the only worldwide product that unfortunately we have in Europe. I would be very happy, and I hope also people at UEFA, at FIBA Europe and other competitions would be happy that have such a global impact product that can attract so many broadcasting houses, TV houses, and that can raise so much audience. Zvone was playing for AC Milan, and at the time we know AC Milan was one of the best clubs in Europe. I was supporting AC Milan, and I still support. Yesterday they won. It's great to have them in the last part of the Champions League again. But we know that they were and they are still very famous in Asia. So all the European clubs have their impact in the whole world. Unfortunately, in other sports we don't have. We can't see that in basketball, in volleyball, because volleyball, maybe you don't know, but volleyball is a global sport like it is football, because it's played all around the world. Unfortunately, it's on a very low level, not just economically, but also in organizational way. We are also facing problems in other sports, in water polo. Raises questions of corruptions, of bad governance, not good governance, not governance, bad governance. So, what does it say? It says, well, we are speaking about the European Super League because, of course, it raised a lot of audience, a lot of interest. And one conference that was organized in Luxembourg, I said, and I repeat it here, thank you, European Super League and A22, because A22 is a company that now is representing, let's say, another company, the European Super League, but they have the same address located in Madrid. And here is maybe one of the most important questions. Zvone said, UEFA and FIFA are like countries, like states. You know who is leading the country, who is the prime minister, who are the members of the government, who are the members of the parliament. You know who is making the political questions, who is responsible for maybe bad decisions. In UEFA you have a whole, and in sport governing bodies you have the whole structure with rights and obligations. in a secret company. Does anyone here in the audience know who are people, not companies, not clubs, who are the people who are leading the A22, the European Super League? Some of them have appeared in the media saying, well, we are here representing, but in the end, they are hiding somewhere. And that's a bad message. Should we then trust into an organizational structure that, of course, always have place and space for a better governance? Of course, with the involvement of the stakeholders. Yes. And who are the stakeholders? Of course, we have FIFPro Europe, the only global association of professional players. We have the, as Zvone mentioned, ECA, European Club Association. We have the European leagues representing the leagues. Those are the stakeholders that are representative and that are member of the social dialogue, of the European social dialogue. Yes, and now we have also the fans, the supporter Europe. They are here also representing as stakeholders. Can anyone name a sport where you have the stakeholders like you have in football? Unfortunately, you can't, because there is no such a thing. On the other hand, you have also a legal base. Those are the memorandums of understandings. So you have also a way how UEFA, as a sport governing body, is collaborating with the stakeholders, with FIFPro, with ECA, with European League, with fans. Now, there is a new association that is trying to be representative, the Union of European Clubs. Why is that? Because the ECA is a bigger Super League, I can say. Because from every country you have between 2 and 4 clubs that are members of the European Clubs Association, and those are the clubs who have good results in the last 5 years were at the UEFA competitions. And they are members and they decide how they will run the association, and it's a way they collaborate, of course, with UEFA. The Union of European Clubs is an association that of, let's say, medium-sized and smaller clubs that actually are also important clubs. Richard is a Leeds United supporter. We cannot say the Leeds United is a small club. It's a club of a great tradition. Maybe it's struggling now with some results, and it probably will not reach UEFA competitions this year. We hope Rijeka will. But what does it mean? Does it mean that Leeds' voice is not important? Yes, it is. It is important. So maybe in that way also the European Clubs Association should be have a new facelift. But I'm pretty much happy with the initiative of the Union of European Clubs. I think it's relevant to hear and to see what the other clubs think, not just Juventus, Real Madrid, Barcelona, and others. And maybe you don't know, but it's important to highlight also that the stakeholders have their place in the bodies of UEFA. So they actually are building the policy, the politics of developing football. Unfortunately, again, I must stress, in other sports, you will not find such a thing. So, and just to close this answer, I would really love that the other sport governing bodies of other sports in Europe see this opportunity as a way how to have a better governance in their own sports. And I think that FIBA Europe is very happy about what's going on, because they have their Super League in basketball, and probably 90% of you have not heard about that, unfortunately, that we have a close competition, and we had problems between the national federations, FIBA Europe, that haven't had the possibility to coordinate the relationship and relations with their member states, which is really a bad message.
Thank you, Vanja. Zvone, you wanted to say something? No?
Ne, Vanja je dobro rekao koliko su stakeholderi involvirani UEFA život, samo da vam objasnim jednu stvar koja vas vjerojatno, ako ste...
Yes, Vanya said put it the right way, how involved they are. I just would like to explain the following. If you're football fans, and you know it, there are club competition bodies where it's a committee and everybody is from clubs. So UEFA cannot change anything until the clubs confirm that. And as far as small clubs and medium-sized clubs are concerned, which we love the same way we do love big clubs. So the Conferential League is there to provide them a possibility to play in Europe, to compete in Europe. So every Champions League, every European League, every Conferential League, so any competition by UEFA has previously gone through the committee where all the clubs are. If it concerns clubs, if it is about national clubs, then it goes through the association committee, which decides on their side. So the members of the committee, again, are from the association, and they have to make a decision about that. And without their yes, UEFA themselves cannot change anything. Because football doesn't belong neither to UEFA nor to FIFA. Football belongs to everybody who likes it. It is mine as much as Simona's if she likes it, but we like it the same way. And this is the only principle how UEFA and FIFA should live up to that.
That, you know, if UEFA's club competitions are so successful, it's also due to the fact that we organize, and we market these competitions in a very inclusive manner together with the clubs, and we also engage with the leagues. This can be seen at the level of the governance of the competitions, as Vone described, but also we share the management of the business of those competitions via a joint venture together with the ECA. Simona, after having heard this description of the ecosystem made by Vanya and Zvone, don't you think it is also time for national governments to step in and to protect this ecosystem? Because the risk, if we continue this path, or if we see more attempts to break away and attempts to increase the privatization or the entertainization of football, that national leagues and everything will collapse. Is there a role for governments here?
The primary goal of each and every government is always to have a voice for so-called public interest, not the private interest. And this public interest in sport means a symbolical value for development, for growth, for something that is good. And therefore, actually, when the governments are expressing their voice for public good in sport, that means that they need to find the measures how to activate the lowest possible level of people, of especially young, to be interested and to start to participate in sport and with sport. And this is the main interest of government, to stimulate, to have a word for why sport is good to practice, for being a better person. And that means that the governments are mostly supporting this through the education, supporting this through various projects for a healthier lifestyle, projects that are related more into the so-called recreational sport, but at the same time, of course, assisting these organized sport organizations in everything that they are doing well and good in this regard. So for something that is a public interest of sport. And it is very sad sorry to say so, when we can see that these symbolical powers of sport in the name of the sport authorities are having that kind of conflicts. And governments would really always like that the sport organizations are being able to solve their own conflicts by themselves inside the family. They don't want with their institutions, that means with the courts, of course, not even the ministries, you know, only with the courts, that the courts are stepping in and, kind of serving as a divorce lawyer or something like that. They don't want to do that. And this is also not a good image of sport in the eyes of governments when these conflicts appear and when it is obvious that they are not going to be able to be solved inside the family. And the other thing, when I was listening to all of your responses, I would also like to emphasize especially these differences, two different phases of sport that are in the society right now. One are the phases of elite sport, of the competition sport, and these are mostly the phases of business. And here the main conflicts are appearing. And this is actually the phase around mostly we are having the debate today. But at the same time, this phase can importantly impact this kind of a pure so-called public interest phase that is sport as a symbolical value of something that is good, something that is solid, or something that actually helps those most vulnerable to become stronger, to become more self-sufficient and self-satisfied in the society. To give them the opportunity to enjoy the game, to play, to have fun, and to be through sport better and like more positive and more kind of a open-minded persons. And this second part is mostly the part where the states and the governments needs to be here for sport. While when it comes to the sport competition, of course, through various measures of mostly financial and economic business type of measures, they can help sport for the sport provisions. Therefore, for example, our government right now, the contemporary one, decided to move the field of sport from the Ministry of Education into the Ministry of Business and Economy, with this kind of a main ambition. But I personally, I'm not the fan of that kind of understanding of sport as a public interest. We need to educate, we need to stimulate, we need to assist, we need to give the opportunity for all the people to tell them why sport is so important. But when it comes to the competition part, when it comes to the part of the elite sport, here actually the European model of sport, respecting the sport autonomy, their integrity, their good governance, needs to work. If it doesn't, then this means that the governmental authorities through the courts will step in. And mostly, it is not needed that their final decision would speak in favor of sport and sport rules and sport autonomy. And that's why it is so important to sit down, to debate, to discuss, to try to solve the conflicts internally. And this is kind of one of the main ambition behind the so-called good governance approach. So let us try to do it together inside the family.
Thank you, Simona. I have the easiest question for Vanya. What do you think will happen in the Super League case? What will be the outcome?
It's $1 million question.
I'm not that rich.
Yeah, thank you, Julien, for the question. I must go back to what Richard said at the very beginning. We have, and for people who are here at the seminar, it's important you know that we have a few cases that are going on. And it's our academic perspective. We are not sure that that's it because we don't have inside information, but it seems that the Court of Justice is trying to settle all those cases at the same time in a unique way. So have to decide to have, let's say, strong sports-related case law at EU level. Why is that? Because you must know that the role of the Advocate General is that he is actually, he or she is actually an expert for the court, and to have the opinions like we have of Advocate General Rantos in the European Super League case and in the ISU case, and the one of Spunar in the homegrown player rule that at the first seems very different, but I think it's a good thing. I think it's good that both views have been, or different aspects have been pointed out. What is interesting is that in the homegrown player rule, the case where you have the other Advocate General, he was asked by the court to deliver his opinion on the free movement rights, while we have the issue about competition that will probably be tackled by the court in the European Super League case and in the ISU case. So in the end, we don't know when the judgment or judgments will be made public, but I think it will be very soon or around this summer. I think, yes, Richard said that Advocate General in the European Super League case was a surprise. His opinion was a surprise. And we all agree that the constitutionalization of the 165 article is something maybe not so expected, but I like that approach. I think it's good that we have an opinion that's also quite a kind of provocative. Yes, you, of course, all the Advocate General and all judges are lawyers. And the joke with lawyers is have 5 lawyers and you will have 7 different opinions. But what gives me a positive way in the end that the court will decide is that the court could and should not take into consideration the fact that in the European Super League case, almost all EU member states have taken their right to intervene in the case and say what they think about, mostly about the question of the European model of sports and the issue about one European federation whose role is to govern and regulate its own sport, and of course with that also to exploit that sport in a commercial way, but in a way that we see as in a way that the money that go in sports is being distributed even to the grassroots level. You see the problem. We are speaking about the European Super League and a few clubs that in the end want more money. And on the other hand, we have the need of the medium or smaller clubs that are actually asking for more money for their work and their development of sports. So it is a huge conflict that cannot be settled by a company, because in the end we will have and we will lose the sports like we have today. I said, unfortunately, the European Champions League and maybe the Premier League, recently the Serie A has been better, but those are the competitions that have global impacts and that bring money to the sports. NBA, NFL, MLS are competitions for a North American model. They are close competitions without real possibility of the development of grassroots, because it's business, business, business. And maybe you don't know, and I will close with that the biggest stadiums in the world that are now in the States are run by mostly universities, which are not state-owned universities, but of course privately owned university, where also the academic and scientific world is being commercialized very strongly. So, since we are at an academic institution, it's something that also should be taken into consideration that, yes, we accept some American values, North American values as good. We enjoy seeing and having our players in the NBA and watching the NBA, but this is not the European model of sports. It's a completely different kind of world, and to have a North American model in the heart of Europe, and in the, unfortunately, I must say again, the only global sport where in Europe is important, that's football. It's not soccer, like they call it in the States.
Thank you very much, Vanya. I have one question remaining for each of the panelists. I'm expecting a very short answer, less than 2 minutes. Starting with you, Richard. You're an authority on these topics, and this is why this question is addressed to you. What view do you take on the future of the player representation market and the future of the player transfer market? 2 minutes. Good luck with that.
Oh, so in terms of football agents,
yes.
the regulation of football agents,
and the transfer market, yes.
Those of you, you may be familiar that FIFA has the competence to regulate the football agents market. And for many years, FIFA adopted a licensing system where agents had to have a license supported with an examination. FIFA abandoned that a few years ago. Many of us at the time warned that that would create big problems, and it has created problems. So FIFA have returned to the regulation of the market and have returned to a licensing system where agents, if they want to practice, represent a player, they need to pass an exam. There are some other requirements. However, there's a couple of controversial issues. First is there are limitations on who an agent can represent now. Multiple representation where an agent can represent all three parties in the transaction is no more. Although dual representation is permitted, one aspect of dual representation is permitted. The other controversial aspect is the conversion of a recommended fee cap to a mandatory fee cap. And as we speak, there is now litigation going across throughout Europe challenging this. I think it's perfectly legitimate for FIFA to try and take a grip of this. However, I do, and I caution against regulating in terms of the exception and not the norm. And I think some of FIFA's objections, particularly in relation to the fee cap, emerged out of a very small number of transactions, one of which we all know about, the Paul Pogba transfer from Juventus to Manchester United, and that is very much the exception. And I think there's a danger if we want to have a fully functioning competitive market where there are plenty of football agents, there's a danger that the fee cap will actually consolidate the market around a small number of agents, which is exactly what FIFA wanted to avoid.
Thank you. Simona, you've been the Minister for Sport in your home country. What if tomorrow you're appointed as EU Commissioner for Education and Sport? What would you do in the first 100 days, the famous first 100 days?
You mean in the field of, for the field of sport?
Yes, for sport, yes.
Definitely additional promotion of the value and of the precious that sport can give for us as individuals and also for the society. And this would mean also more concretely a lot of more intense cross-sectoral cooperation. That means not only sport for itself, but also sport in the field of health, in the field of sustainable development, in the field of social inclusion. So really to show and to have a voice for the big power that sport can have for the future of not only the society, but also of the civilization.
Thank you very much. Zvone, maybe you can elaborate further when we have the interview with Vanya afterwards, but where do you see football going in 10 years? Which opportunities do you see for the development of the game? Which threats? I don't want to talk about crisis because we've had enough, but in a few words and then you can elaborate afterwards.
Mislim da se neće puno promijeniti, neka natjecanja će nova doći, neka će se promijeniti na sreću.
I don't think that many things will happen. Some events will come up, some will change, some competitions will change, some maybe will become a burden to our calendar. But it is already set. We have voted for it already, and then later, outside, we can talk about details. I don't think that huge changes will happen. I think there are so many mad ideas surrounding football. One of them is IFAB. People do not know much about that. They know that there is a board, but that is IFAB, which is a composition of an IFA. And there are 4 British federations which have 1 vote, and FIFA has 4 votes. And there are 3 levels of making decisions. No, I'm sorry, 3 processes until rules can change. The first is TAP meetings, or technical meetings and football meetings. They said the technicians are referees and our football players are, I don't know which category, and I was there then. I said, how can you make a difference between them? Those are all people from the field. And then they combine them again. And then the next level is the board of directors, which considers what people have previously considered at the technical level, and then they forward it to General Assembly, which happens once a year. And there is a decision made then with 2/3 of votes. So it means 75%, which means they need 6 votes in favor and 2 against to pass a decision. I hope there will be no mad ideas, because there is a ball and there is a field, and it was there before the buildings were constructed together with those to government.
The research center that you're spearheading deals with sports law, I understand, fine. Sports policy, here again I have an idea. Can you tell us more about sports diplomacy and whether you think, honestly, that UEFA contributes to sports diplomacy?
Yes, thank you, Julien. Well, since we are having here the leading European expert about sport diplomacy, Professor Parrish, who was a member of the high-level group of the European Commission in developing sport diplomacy at EU level, and together with Julien and Richard is a member of the center, we are working very hard in this way. And we ran an Erasmus Plus project led by Richard of developing the sport diplomacy in EU level, but not just institutional level, also pointing out and highlighting the examples of good practice at national level. Here, of course, there are plenty of good examples being different in different countries. Speaking about football, I think also it's important to say how the Premier League is working in some undeveloped part of the world where they are promoting their games, but also English language and culture through the Premier League and their game. And that's a good example of developing the culture, developing the values of your own country. But when you're speaking about the European level, I think, of course, the European Union must have maybe more important role in that regard. We have the Council of Europe, of course, that is his as an important institution. And I see, and I think UEFA, but also here, also together with FIFA, when you're speaking about football, they have a great potential in developing sport diplomacy, in promoting European values, in promoting, so speaking about UEFA, of course, in promoting human rights. You see at every match that UEFA is organizing signs, respect, fight against hate speech, against racism, xenophobia, and so on. It's not an easy task for the sport governing bodies, because usually, and here our friend Angelo at UEFA and the head of the disciplinary and the legal department in UEFA that deals with all disciplinary sanctions after each UEFA competition match, when you must fine a club because the supporters have been singing inappropriate songs or have been shouting inappropriate words, then the clubs, unfortunately, are those that are responsible for that. We see, and I think you will all agree with me, that at national level, the hate speech is not tackled as much as it is at European level. And this is, again, one question where we do need a good regulator, a regulator that are regulating the system from the top to the bottom. And every single club that wants to compete in the European competition must respect the regulations. And by that regulations, you are also regulating sports at national level. So, yes, maybe legally you'll not think about that, but rules and regulations are here to respect the human values and human rights. And just to conclude, believe me, I say football and the sport governing bodies in football, FIFA and UEFA, are many times more powerful than, unfortunately, than the United Nations, for example. Because the problem is it would be more appropriate that at the United Nations Assembly, the countries, and now speaking about state authorities, bring necessary decisions, but sometimes they can't. But football is changing the world. So we see women finally on football matches in some countries. I will not mention them, you know them very well. It's because of football, and it's because of sport governing bodies. It's not because of the countries, and it's not because of the United Nations, unfortunately. Thank you.
On this, thank you very much, Vanya. We're coming to a close. It doesn't mean that the debate is finished, because we scratched only the very surface. But thank you to our four panelists. They deserve a big round of applause. And now it's time to move on to what is probably your highlight of the day, the Q&A session with the legend Zvonimir Boban. Thank you.
Thank you, Julien. As it was announced at the very beginning, we will now move to Croatian, and we will speak in Croatian, and we will answer, Zvone will answer the questions in Croatian. Tako da evo, hvala svima još jednom na dolasku, hvala na interesu. Naravno, Zvone je tu u prvom redu zbog vas.
Thank you very much once again for coming. Thank you for the interest you showed. Well, one is here because of you. And before I start the questions, do you have questions now? Somebody wants to ask something. It can be related to something we already talked about, but you can ask also questions to the panelists if it's something, if you heard something they have said, maybe you're interested in, or maybe it seems interesting to you, or maybe you disagree with something. It is a discussion. And we're there to argument something. Maybe there are persons who like that it is illegal, but let's share the experience.
Jedno pitanje koje nije možda baš povezano s ovim što smo pričali, ali...
Hello everybody, one question maybe it's not related to what we've talked about, but I believe you answer it. It's related to the financial fair play. We see that some football teams are spending millions of euros and they're not being punished. Chelsea, for example, now. They've spent millions since the new owner, got the new owner, and then we have smaller teams. Well, if you can comment on that. I can, yes. Financial fair play is quite difficult to formulate it precisely and to define it to be credible and to be clear to everybody, but it is fair to everybody. So Paris Saint-Germain has been fined, Manchester City, also many other clubs who are also sanctioned. As far as Chelsea is concerned, there are some innovative contracts, and they think that they will avoid problems. So, but I believe there is an independent body dealing with that, lawyers, and they know how financial fair play works. Even though I know how it works, I think they will have an insight into the documents, and the least they can do is, well, they have to deal with it. But the question again is how far this sports right by UEFA are they treated, and how far this can intrude into the Chelsea rights, into this civil law. That is a problem the financial fair players has to deal with. Clubs are also companies, because you regulate the state-owned companies. There are in your system. But what if they end before court? But we try to remain colleagues and to make some settlement agreements, and with the settlement agreements they find the clubs who accept that, and the entire money goes to charity, to UEFA foundations, to development for smaller clubs, and for the development of young football and female football. For 3 years, UEFA is checking, and it takes 3 years until they pass a decision. So I can't mention any details here. It's an independent body. But finally, there must be a regulation. And sometimes it is not easy to do that, because you would like to have the possibility to people to invest and to organize competitions. On the other hand, it has to be sustainable. It has to be sustainable, yes. So it isn't easy to find the right, well, measure to do that, but there must be the right provision. I'm sorry that Rijeka was fined. They are now appealing to that decision. I hope they will find a fair solution. My way is always to understand first on a human basis, and if it is parallel to the law, then okay. Another question.
Da, sad radim. Dobar dan svima. Mene zanima kako je stajalište UEFA što se tiče mogućnosti
Hello, everybody. I would like the point of view of UEFA as far as the regional league is concerned, and whether if it's the future, because most of the teams depend on the transfer of players and broadcasting rights. Such a league would be more interesting for the viewers, and it would, well, produce more money. I have played for the Yugoslav league, which was a brilliant league, and I have learned back in those days. I remember so many things. I left Yugoslavia with 22 and left to, I'd say, Milan. And I remember how strong that was, but it is gone. Now, this cannot be appreciated anymore. You cannot qualify at European level if you haven't gone through the National League. That's the regulation. And it would be so realistic Another thing, we're dreaming of something which is not the same. We do not live in the same media realities. How would we tell to Suvremeni or somebody else that they cannot play any right league anymore? What goes on? Nobody knows the league because we do not know these people. Before we knew everybody who played in Crvena Zvezda, Partizan, Čelik, and others. I do not know any name of people playing in Vardar. Everything is different. It's not logical to say that. The regulation is defined to do that. Consider and others. Well, Crvena Zvezda is against that. After 30 years, people live better and better. And we respect that as well. There was another question.
Za početak hvala vam uopće što ste nam pružili priliku doći da razgovaramo malo.
Thank you very much for providing us this opportunity to come and to talk to you. The question is very up to date and it regards what is deliberate hand playing. How would you deal with this problem? No, Wednesday we had idle before. How will we refer to that problem? Who will take responsibility if the referee is wrong? Before we start, here's Tomago Vučko. He's an ex-FIFA referee. He's from the Commission, is also a member of our center. Now we shall speak two languages. I believe that, well, that is my opinion, and nothing legally I'm talking about. I think that the rules of the game are being changed too often. We have very deep modifications and more and more. Well, it is becoming a problem. I have been part of the team. At the end, we should find the proper solution. Of course, I will not ask the question. Well, I will support that understanding. We have a problem. The trainer of the girlfriend. I believe that we should slightly change these rules so that we're coming from this football background could understand it better, and also to make it easier for our viewers, for spectators to understand that easier. It is not good when regulations and rules are being changed too often. You haven't explained the hands. I do agree, even though I have changed many of these laws together with others because, yeah, I'm in front of, well, that part of FIFA. But back then, we have changed rules with very logical to change that. It was appropriate to the time we had back then. Let's go back to this hand playing. So that it doesn't change the game when you leave somebody out. When you play within the 16-meter field, that is a problem. When you put the people 1 meter from the line, well, everybody understands why they do that. If you shoot the ball back to those who had the ball before, not to others, well, these are also tiny situations, but when you put into a legal framework something that should, based on an interpretation, be decided upon whether it is hand playing or not, well, this is difficult to understand. What your referees want to do when I left, because they are the ones to lead the game. That's a problem. There is no football part there, but you all are football, but there is no that players' football is natural football. But referees to protect themselves and you have put too many rules on football. There is no natural interpretation what is hand playing or not, to make his body as big as possible, because an arm is part of the body. Well, explain that to me. What is there unnatural? In a game of contact, it is natural, but every time there's, well, the rule is as it is, that every time that referee's decision is protected. But when there is a mistake happening, they do not admit that mistake, and that results in confusion. And people do not know, due to bad communication, due to a lack of communication, because the referees are like a sect. They will explain it to each other, but not to us, and also to people who are for their whole life in football, and also to others. And if I like something in this world, it's football, but there are so many things you do not understand, and this needs to be changed. How and why? Please tell me why. Why a yellow card to when somebody has played indeliberately? Are you referees or are you sanctioners? Well, that is something that produces bad energy in the field. And I hope that the new wave of football board will create, together with Rosecki and others, and you will also listen to the opinion of others. We will not change the rules, no, but the guidance is the directives, these can be changed, and we have to go back to a natural relation. What is hand playing or arm playing and not? People cannot play like penguins. It's difficult, and it's my opinion how an arm should be solved. What is also of key interpretation. Tell us when you have made a mistake. I have worked in media for years, and I know when problems come up. I went through everything in football, and I have feeling for that. Without being too modest. You remember, for the first time in history, we have introduced a VAR. Nobody has introduced a VAR like the project. And then later, after group phase, we had three huge mistakes planted up. Three huge mistakes. And I said, Saka and Colina, well, there we go. Press conference, please admit to what you have done. Tragedy. Are you mad? They will blame the referees. How will they continue their work? Because those who made mistakes due to their credibility, they already slapped. So there was a press conference, 350 people were there. And they talked about VAR, and they said, so those were the mistakes. And the people were not confused that it was mistakes and not the matter of rules nobody understands any longer. I didn't refer to, I know, I just talked about it. It is quite complicated, I do agree here. It is very difficult to explain the natural and non-natural position of the hand. And this is part of the directive that changed. Maybe I've put it wrong, guys. No. We had change in regulations after 10 years. And everybody who charged was a referee to that. Today, I believe that system of directives is very good because we have video clips and every half a year then they work on that and working on their practice, and this should lead to a higher credibility. But as far as this decisions referring to mistake concern, yes, I do agree with that. Part of the legal system, so that I believe that definitely we should open ourselves to the public because that leads us to credibility. This interpretation of the hand now is what I said. How is it possible to say what is natural and what not? I hold my hands differently when I run than when I walk. This is a matter of the moment, a matter of the movement, whether you use the left or right hand. Sometimes you hit someone in the hand. Well, how can you tell what something is natural to somebody and what not? This could never be a panel that somebody gets a yellow card for that and to be sanctioned. That is why we have regulations. How can something that had first touched and bounced back from another part of the body and then your arm, how can it be taken as a mistake? No, alcohol will be here forever. No, okay, forget it. Question. Just a brief question. Zvone, you mentioned football board for those who do not know. Last week at Suvremeni, this body was founded. Zvone Boban together with Mr. Rossetti, who is from Istria. So we're glad to that you're representative very much. He will lead this 20-person body with the most eminent trainers like Paolo Mangini, Carlo Ancelotti, Zidane, and which should be your role? In which direction does that go? We should talk about everything what is football, about rules and regulations in football, so that we have an influence to that. And the nature, we would like the nature of football to remain the same. Bayern has not changed only the game, they have changed the decision-making process as well, which is something completely different. It doesn't tell you play left and right, that's not the problem. But the rules of football are very delicate, and if they would have changed rapidly, then definitely this could cause a problem. The Americanization of our sports could lead to marketingization of football. But there are plenty of silly ideas because people very often do not think about consequences. There are many technocrats who think about how to leave their own trace and to implement changes for their own sake in football, and they don't think about the destiny of football as such. Development of young players. Many things will be developed here together with Rossetti, and we shall talk about that. It is not the executive body. It is a consultancy council, but it will have a specific role, and it will define a lot in sports for UEFA and for others. That's it. You earlier said that players, though that clubs should be represented in UEFA A22. So the owner of the Superliga at his Twitter profile said that clubs do not have any influence to the decision making in UEFA. No, before you said they do. No, they lie. Those people lie. They lie for their own sake, to represent their own interests, and who knows how it functions. Why would Vanya say what he said? For Julian, for myself, or if I know, he said it because he knows. In the memorandum of understanding between the ICI and us, which is the only representative of clubs in Europe, I believe, Julian, you know it better, I believe, that if two presidents do not agree at the committee, or if UEFA is forcing one thing, so the other president of the clubs cannot do anything. That is right, yes. So in that joint venture, we have there's 51% owned by UEFA, which is normal, 49% that participate in all the marketing activities. So it's 50-50 actually, but if there would be some conflict and disagreement, then again, we would have the casting power from UEFA's, any member of that body, so like that too. So it's 51 anyway, but in this case, it's 50-50. So without the clubs, you cannot change any competition. So if the representative doesn't co-sign that document, nothing works. He lies. Just forget it. Once again, hello to the legendary captain and also to the others. As is fact of the broadcasting rights that provides the largest amount of income to everybody, we have a following situation that the Premier League is very branded and very cherished on television, and they get more money in that season than the second or third is the A-League. So in that context, I don't want to sound as a supporter of these mad ideas. No, I think the same as you do. Have you understood that as the beginning point? Because I have the impression that they try to close the gap between English clubs and other huge clubs in Europe. And is it possible to regulate something in that context, or will it be left to the level of free market, how much is somebody able to offer? You know yourself that a club that leaves the Premier League gets more money than a second or a club in second or third place. Never is something the same. No football is the same as another. We cannot balance financially all the clubs. The Premier League was very far for Italy in the 90s. No of the Italians gave a damn about that. So when they said that it's a predominant league, well, that's the capacity of the leagues to do their job properly. I think that Italian, Spanish league, they are supposed to be a model to others how to achieve that level. They shouldn't represent a problem. I personally think that the Italian league, if they would construct stadiums, they would become very, very charming. They have so good names, famous names, and they have they're brilliant brands, better brands than the Premier League. But the Premier League has worked brilliantly in the previous years in order to achieve. They have very good fields, and they deserve this renaissance success. But everything is changeable. Sometimes back, I played in the Italian league, they called it NBA. Well, I know him, he was from Sportske Novosti, that's a sports journal. I remember him. That's the model we should live up to. And previously we have said, please do not forget that the one who is to blame for these national rules, clubs, or LTDs in a country, and according to the rules of the country, regulations of the country, they pay taxes, and that is what is imposed by the country, not by UEFA. The financial fair play just controls how much somebody can or may spend, but the national regulation is the one able to open the space for the development of national football or to close it up. In England, the chances are really huge for the English clubs. The Spanish have also developed something in that direction, and then many cases came before court because of taxes they haven't paid properly or never. Sometimes we lawyers it seems that we should be blamed for that, because it is always the regulating body who has to think about that and to prevent that anybody can come around regulations, especially if you're a body that coordinates 55 national alliances or national organizations and less than 55 legal systems, and there is not much you can do. I would like that the series becomes best again, but the main responsible, this area is responsible body, first of all, is the Italian state, and they're the ones who can do something. Definitely, UEFA with the solidarity can do a lot, and they help. Maybe, Julian, there is some space, something we can do, but always together with clubs. So everything is being done together with the clubs.
Breakaway league.
I mean,
it was part of the Football League. and there were 92 clubs, and the Premier League broke away from it. Now, of course, it's an officially endorsed breakaway because the English Football Association endorsed it. But did the English Football Association have a choice in that? In no way is that comment in support of the European Super League.
But it's a fact. To je činjenica. Profesorice, u prvi red. Evo. I evo, još možda jedno pitanje, morat ćemo nažalost
I would like to ask a question to everybody.
So I wanted to thank you for this very interesting debate. I'm an amateur in law, but also in football, obviously. But it was very interesting and prompted me to pose a question to all of you. So I think football is really, at least for me, the most beautiful game on this planet. Will always attract a lot of attention, a lot of money, but also a lot of problems, like Super League and the others. So my question goes whether football can serve as a role model in regulation of sports and sports issues. Is it current framework, legal framework and legal tools like Lisbon Treaty you were talking about, like European model of sports, are they enough to cope with challenges that are present and will be present in the future? Or you envisage that you need some new instruments, new tools, particularly supranational, like at the European level, to cope with future problems that might be even more complex. Thank you.
Richard, goes you.
Any volunteers?
Well, I mean, earlier I mentioned that, you know, is there a role for a regulator? We're having this discussion in the UK at the moment about an independent regulator for English football because of a number of problems that have arisen, such as ownership of clubs and clubs going into administration and unfortunately liquidation as well. It's a bit odd for me to talk about the European Union as a British person, of course, but I will anyway. You might argue that we've already got a European regulator. It's called the European Commission and the European Court of Justice. But their role is very different. Their role is to supervise the choices that the sports governing bodies make themselves. And I think the solutions to the problems of sport lie within the sports movement. And if they don't take those decisions appropriately, then we have the European Commission and the Court of Justice, which really is not a venue that these issues should be resolved in. I think it's incumbent upon the sports movement to get their house in order. Football is clearly well ahead of the game in terms of doing that. It's probably an unspoken word because there's a solidarity between the sports movement, but there are some practices in other sports that have resulted in judgments before the Court of Justice and the European Commission that must make more professionally run sports like football really wins. I mean, the International Skating Union case, I think, is an example of that, where better governance, that case would have been nowhere near Luxembourg. And I think that's an issue for sport. Many years ago, I did a study for the European Commission on nationality discrimination in Olympic sports across Europe. We discovered that there's so much discrimination going on for no good reason. It's perfectly possible to exclude a non-national from a sporting competition for legitimate sporting objectives, but there's some sports, and I won't name them, they didn't even know why they were discriminating on the grounds of nationality. It's just, well, we've always done that. Well, that's not good enough.
Okay, once again, try to solve the problems and conflicts at home. This is the first message. The second one is try to name and shame on the basis of the previous bad or conflictual experiences and how they were solved. And here maybe I was thinking about the positive and negative effects of solving similar problems with the basketball or tennis federation, which is in a way, by the idea, it's quite similar, by the details not, but try to see how they were approaching and what was good and what was terribly bad. And to see how much you can learn from the others about that. And the third one, is it, I think that this, the UEFA and this Super League problem actually, it's not that European regional, but it is actually probably wider international by its nature. And that's why I was thinking about the idea of making a kind of a new independent agency that would, at the international level, try to solve that kind of problems when they appear, like being a kind of independent court of justice or something like that in that kind of cases. So a kind of federation mediator for that kind of conflictual situations. So a body that would independently, how to say, like make some proposals and kind of advocacies how to approach to solve the problem. So anyhow, I would definitely try to find the way and the solution inside the family again. So that's the one thing that I also said to Boban when we spoke before the round table. Have we really done anything possible to solve the problem at home? So this is it. Yeah.
Slažem se sa svim.
I ovdje, prije zadnjega pitanja, kao arbitar kasa ne smijem ulaziti u problematiziranje djelovanja kasa. Mislim da je uloga kasa jako važna.
I'm not allowed to talk about CAS. I think the role of CAS is very important. It is an independent body together with the experts who have the possibility to have a full tool in sports system. And definitely it is another specific feature of sports also mentioned in Article 165. And this article encompasses all that. So the specific feature of sports is definitely something we should take into account, because a professional football player should have the status of an employee, but not employee at a very, well, classical or traditional working spot or job, because you do not work 8 hours a day in an office, because you're focused on your job more than somebody sitting in an office for 8 hours, and not to mention in quarantines and preparations and press conferences, marketing, actions where you have to go wherever the club sends you to. So there's definitely a specific feature to that. Paolo Maldini is one of the players who has spent his entire career in one club, and in his later football years it is difficult to find somebody like that. But Paolo Maldini couldn't also play when he's 60. Well, maybe he's still better running than others, but much younger than he is. Hello, everybody. I shall try 2 questions. Questions related to Super League Does UEFA develop a strategy? What they will do if that decision will be negative, the decision in Luxembourg? Or is UEFA convinced that the decision will be positive? And the other question, on UEFA level, or maybe FIFA level, have you ever thought about to introduce a regulation in our football which would be up to the salary cap in America? And would such rules where these cap would be limited, so a limitation to the amounts that can be used to buy a player. Well, I shall refer to the salary cap later. It is always one league, private league, and very often they agree upon things, but here the rules are different other points of view in different countries. It is an international matter. So it is very difficult to get a consensus, even though UEFA is thinking a lot about that. But all the stakeholders should agree upon that, and there will be varying disagreements, I believe. Julien knows that very well, much better than I do. So, but as far as the Super League is concerned, we have a document signed with all the leagues, with all the supporters, that we're continuing our competition in a normal way. If everything is on a voluntary basis, well, there are clubs that need to be to license themselves. They don't have to be. So every year, June 1st, after the season, they all apply. So those who are not members, they send the documents and they participate in our competitions. So we will continue our programs and these three clubs. And if somebody else will try to get in, that's their problem, or not get in, we'll play with others. They can play their own league if they want to. Now it's a threesome, and later whatever we want. Those who applied for the Champions League this year. So it leaves a bad feeling. Hello, thank you for coming. And I'm glad that you're watching press conferences of Mr. Dalic and then you speak in Croatian. I would like to ask a question, the relation between UEFA and FIFA. Even though for somebody who's not watching that, it doesn't seem that their relation is bad. But somebody say there are some overlappings and they do not agree very well. You've been in FIFA, now you're in UEFA. And most of all, you're talking that Gianni Infantino wants to have club competition, and they will satisfy the appetite of the clubs who wanted to play in the Super League. No, I wasn't inspired by Dalic to talk Croatian. No, the beauty of her language was the inspiration. And how can you talk English in Croatia? Even though I respect English, it's a well-known language, but no, I didn't feel well talking English here. Now, the idea of a club world championship was developed by me at the very beginning. And the idea was to provide more space to the clubs and to protect UEFA. On the Secretary General, Gianni Infantino, he was there many years, so he knows about. So in 2016, that already happened, almost the Super League problem, and we all together somehow blocked that thing. But then we tried to think how to provide something else, how to give something more to the clubs. Unfortunately, that's the situation. And the idea was we have 4 year for the championship, and we came up with that in Miami between Alexander Ceferino and Gianni Infantino. That is between UEFA and FIFA to go with 24 clubs, 18 days of a tournament, 2 games in a group. That would be more logical due to the calendar and also in order to protect the health of the players because they play really hard. And at the end, it happened that there will be 32 teams. It will last longer. It is too aggressive for the beginning. It could be developed into the first 2 or 3 editions, and I think this is counterproductive to start so huge. But the idea, yes, was to begin with the big clubs and to give a global international framework where these clubs can develop their brands and earn some money. They pay the players 15-20 millions to talk about that why and how. That's pointless, but that's the way. So they have to earn more money than others do. Yes, that was the idea, to block the Super League in that way, which hasn't been blocked. And at the end, the championship didn't even start. So I don't know if they have accomplished something. What I think was that they want to rule their own league. And just a brief question for the end. It was a very long and impressive career. We all remember all your games, the first in Dinamo, then in Milan, then the Croatian national team, then your career in FIFA on television, then again in another role in Milan, and today's position of Milan, I believe it's also due to you, to your effort in UEFA. The best time of your career, not only football, but also everywhere, because you're an example of an athlete with a long career, and you went through everything that is possible, which is rare. You went through all the aspects. What would you point out as your most favorite moment? Always what is first, my first game at Dinamo, my first game for the Croatian Croatian national team here in Rijeka before Christmas. That was 1990. Then my first game for Milan in San Siro. So everything that comes first, that is always the brightest. And everything that is bright in my life, that is always related to the playground. And it is a time of a virtual world. It doesn't properly prepare you for the afterlife, life after playing. And it is difficult to start living normally. Everybody lives normally. It is difficult to ask, which is again a natural thing, but I think I went quite well through that process. But everything related to football from the emotional side is very difficult to achieve. And afterwards we understand how strong it was in a beautiful job. Thank you, Walla.
I think, mogu reći na hrvatskom, mislim da je pogotovo sa prvim odgovorom bio jako zadovoljan naš profesor Pudislav Vukas, inače veliki navijač Dinama, tako da, evo, on se svakako veseli tome. Thank you Zvone, thank you Simona, thank you Richard, thank you Julien, thank you for being part of today's event. Thank you all for coming, thank you all who are following us online. Thanks to our partners, the Sport in the EU and the Football Eagle. And by saying that, we are closing today's event and hope to see you and meet you soon in some other occasion. Thank you very much.